Well, friends, welcome to Module 5. I want to spend this time talking through the PowerPoint that wraps up our time together. It is a vision for deep church. What do I mean by deep church? I spent my last 9 months on sabbatical looking at a whole movement of churches that seem to have opted out of traditional approaches to ministerial formation for non-conventional ones, where basically the church themselves becomes seminaries. What do I mean by that? Well, two words we have to reckon with in order to have this make sense to you. One is ministerial formation. I'm putting that in contrast to theological education. Ministerial formation can happen anywhere in the body of Christ with baptized believers, in an Ephesians 4 sort of way, equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. Theological education is a specific and technical and cultural term that hails from a credentialing society, is rooted in elitist values. After all, you can't really even participate in it unless you qualify through an admissions process, unless you have certain degrees, and unless you've achieved those degrees with a certain GPA. There's certain kind of values that say some qualify and some don't. Now, if that's what we've come up with as a continuation of what Jesus and the 12 are doing, or Paul and the 16 were doing, then we have lost our way. We've got to make sense as to what is this thing called theological education in contrast or in comparison with what is it that churches are doing when they are faithfully and adequately equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. Some of that relates to the leadership equipping. Some of it relates to laborership equipping. What I want to do in this PowerPoint is just seed some thoughts with you that we can discuss online. I've organized my thinking into chapters just to kind of keep it all under control. Chapter 1 says this: the church was once a seminary. That's a claim that I'm making. In order to understand that, you have to understand that I'm using the word in its radical and literal sense, a seminary, a place where seeds get a chance, a protected way to grow, to be nurtured. The church was once a seminary. You can look at Jesus and the 12, and you can see that the way he related to the 12 as a small missionary band, an itinerant band, had a kind of protected quality. He had a teacher-master gilded sort of relationship, master-apprentice sort of relationship. The church was once a seminary. I plant in the PowerPoint presentation a whole series of images. They happen to be just the titles of books that suggest that people today are yearning for something of an ancient nature. I put some quotes in there that suggest that people have been longing for something that isn't too far off the mark of what Jesus and the 12 are doing and Paul and 16 were doing, or Paul and the 72. That's those 72 people that you can find Paul giving greetings to at the end of most of his letters. You can hear some of this longing in folks. Let me read one of these. This came off of a website that I found just a few days ago, a fellow's blog. He says this. It says, "When I became a Christian 33 years ago, I felt that I was called to ministry in some capacity, but I did not like that I should go to seminary. I did not think that I should go to seminary. What I really wanted was for someone to take me under their wing and mentor me. I had a few brief and informal relationships like that, but nothing that was ever focused and sustained." That feeling for something organic and accessible, fairly low cost, something which could be done at home, is a feeling that a lot of people have. And yet when they can't find it at church, they begin looking around for more books or more seminars, and eventually they make the radical and very expensive choice of saying, I guess I ought to go to seminary. My guess is that some of you watching this right now are those kinds of folks that may be accruing debt in the 40, 50, 60, 80,000 range in order to get what could not be found inside of the local community. That kind of helps some of the tragedy of what it is we're dealing with get out in front of us, causes us to feel it. Here's the predicament. Seminaries for the last 30 years at least have been re-engineering themselves, and most of the changes that they've been making have been mostly of a cosmetic nature. Not window dressing, not pretend, but I mean cosmetic, on the surface. It's been adding this and subtracting that. And if you look at the kind of changes, like adding internships and supervisions and field-based and online studies and all of these different these changes have often moved things closer and closer to the context of the local, the context of the region. When the seminary fixes something, it usually moves closer to what you could receive at a church. That's because the seminary, by its definition, a residential seminary by its definition, is at distance from the church. Take that in for a moment. Here's the predicament. Seminaries aren't going anywhere anytime soon because we live in a credentialing society. But if seminaries did disappear tomorrow, this experience, which gives folks a significant amount of depth and discipline and formation and access to thinking through the ages, where would the churches get it from? Seminars? The church library? Maybe. Most churches today, if seminaries were to disappear, would not be able to handle the freight of Ephesians chapter 4. They would not be able to give evidence of it, even if it could get them convicted in a court of law of being faithful. They could not produce evidence that they were equipping saints for the work of the ministry to the degrees that Ephesians chapter 4 is talking about. So the church has a predicament and the seminary has a predicament. At the center of all of this is a longing for a deeper life, a formed person who can produce with steadiness and durability the ways of Christ, a sacramental life that represents the completion of what God is looking for in the mission and the invitation of others into the mission. This is what I want to call habitus, the habitus that Christ is forming in us, that sense of disposition that is shaped in a cruciformed way to be in unity with the Trinity. That's what we're after. That's the depth that he's seeking. That's the depth charge that he leaves for us, to be rooted. The church was once a seminary, and it did that very well. Now our approach to this is fragmented. There's a Christian industrial complex with bookstores and radios and TV programs and seminaries and publishing houses that seek to come in to do what could be done by the local church in an organic way. So the church was once a seminary, but chapter 2 says the seminary left